Now, as the Americans were closing in, and Americans and British and Canadians were closing in from the west, the Russians were pouring in from the east. I should say Soviets, perhaps. I mean, it's confusing because they were first Russia, then they became the Soviet Union. Now they're Russia again. But nevertheless, yeah, the Soviets were pouring in from the east. The Soviets also arrived inside German territory. And here is a problem. Let's say here's Germany. The Soviets were coming in here. Here's the capital, Berlin. And the Americans and British, Canadians, and eventually the French regrouped, and they were coming in from the west. And it was obvious that Berlin was going to fall into the hands of the Soviets. The United States generals sat together and said, well, should we try to take Berlin before the Soviets get there? And they said, no. One general said that it cost us 100,000 men. He said American lives were just worth more than a little bit of advantage. So we basically wound up allowing the Soviets to take East Germany, including Berlin. I can't blame our generals for doing that. Also, we're afraid a detachment of Americans might run into a detachment of Soviets and start shooting each other, and we wind up fighting a big war with the Soviet Union. And folk, this was exactly what Hitler was hoping for. Hitler, in his last dream and last illusion, believed that the United States and Soviets would start fighting each other. Then he was going to join the war on the side of the United States and help to defeat. This actually was his dream, his hope, and defeat the Soviet Union. It did not quite work out that way. We demanded an unconditional surrender. We did this both with the Germans and Japan. Hitler wound up going into his bunker. We believe he heard of the death of his buddy Mussolini 2 days before he died. The night before he died, he married his girlfriend, longtime girlfriend, Eva Braun. Then supposedly he shot himself. Now I want to state, folk, I've done some research on this. His body has never been found. As one of you looks like to me like you've heard this story too. There are even rumors that Hitler escaped. The Soviets claimed that they have the body, and yeah, Stalin said, yeah, we've dug it up. The body was buried. Here's something else weird about the story. All of Hitler's staff told the same story, and folk, when you have a situation where everybody tells the same story, you get the feeling they were told what to say. I mean, if your leader dies, you just take the death of President Kennedy, for example, 50 years ago. The people who witnessed it told all kinds of different stories. There was a shooter here. We think the shot came from there. And the fact is, when a shot comes from a place where there's tall buildings, you can't tell where the shot came from. Some people smelled gunpowder. And, oh yeah, the shot came from a sewer right in there. All kinds. They didn't tell the same story. But in case of Hitler's death, all of his staff told the same story, that Hitler and his wife had committed suicide. They'd taken him out and buried him and lit a flame over top of their grave. Actually, they set his wife's body on fire. And the Russians came in and dug up the body of him and his wife and carried it away. And both him and his wife's bodies have disappeared from that day to this. But the body has never been found. Be that as it may, there is one person who claims that he saw Hitler in Norway on a ship heading for Antarctica. This story has been told also, and there have been persons who said, from time to time, they claim they have sighted Adolf Hitler in Mexico or in Latin America. The reason, folk, most of these men who escaped the Nazis wound up going to Latin America. As for why, I can't prove what I think, so I'm not going to say it. This time I won't. But as for why they picked Latin America. But one reason might have been the Latin Americans did not declare war on Germany until Germany was all but whipped. They sat on the sidelines and watched. Then when Germany was all but whipped, they all declared war on Germany in a pile, until every one of them practically declared war. But they really never sent any troops, never fought against Germany. And when the war was over, a lot of the former Nazis found their way across the sea. From time to time, a Nazi war criminal will appear up in the United States. It makes news. And from time to time, they'll appear up in Latin America. The Israelis especially would like to go after them, except for one thing. When the war was over, Latin America decided to vote with Israel in the UN. And the Israelis decided, looks, to keep Latin America's vote, we have to leave these war criminals alone. There was one exception, though, and that was Adolf Eichmann. The Jews went in and got him. That's another story in itself. They went in and got him and put him on trial. And for Josef Mengele, the Jews knew he was in Paraguay, but Paraguay voted with Israel in the United Nations, so Israel left him alone. Eventually, Mengele drowned in a swimming pool accident. Have any of you heard any of this stuff before? At least a couple, yeah, 2 or 3 of you nodding your head. Yeah, that they found their way into Latin America. Again, I cannot prove what I somewhat suspect, so I better keep my trap shut. Anyway, Hitler's gone. We used to call it VE Day, Victory in Europe, VE Day. It was May 9th, 1945. Don't worry about the date except for the year, 1945. But the victory celebration was restrained because we still had to defeat the Japanese. Okay, the case of Japan. We got the Japanese. The war is now in Okinawa. Now we're close to the mainland and we can drop really heavy bombs. What I forgot to tell you, but I'll tell you, just shortly before Adolf Hitler died, shortly even before Mussolini died, Roosevelt died. Yes, Hitler and Mussolini both outlived Roosevelt. The new president was Harry Truman. Harry Truman had risen to popularity all of a sudden because Harry Truman went around the country in his car looking at government facilities and exposing waste. And yeah, one of the places he went to was Lockheed. And Lockheed has been guilty of a whole lot of waste practices from time to time. I mean, you'll hear about it. I mean, I'm very much for having spent 27 years with them myself, but their record is not spotless. But anyway, Harry Truman was exposing wasteful spending on the war. And he became really popular, so Roosevelt picked him because he was suddenly popular. It was said that when Roosevelt decided to pick him, they brought Harry Truman in to see him, and Harry Truman left Roosevelt's presence and said to one of Roosevelt's top aides, "Hey, I don't think this thing's going to last another 4 years." And the top aide, "Wait a minute, you just keep your mouth shut about that. We don't talk about that. Just keep quiet about that." They elected Roosevelt for a 4th term. They elected him in November. In April, shortly before the war ended in Europe, Roosevelt was dead. Anyway, Harry Truman, once he is in office, a bunch of generals came to him and said, "Now, Mr. Truman, you remember one time you were investigating some government waste, yeah, and you were investigating a project called the Manhattan Project, code name, and there were millions of dollars being siphoned into this project. You remember that?" "Yeah," he said, "I remember." "And you were told to keep your hands off of it." "Yes, I was told to keep my hands off of it." "Well, here's what it is. We've developed a brand new weapon, a really weapon that it's the same force that keeps the sun lit." Now, that's slightly wrong science, but that was how they explained it to Mr. Truman. "But this weapon is greatly feared, but we believe that this weapon will end the war in Japan." What he was talking about was the atomic bomb. Well, for Mr. Truman, on him and on his shoulders alone rested the decision, should he order it dropped. All right, folk, I want to elaborate on that a little bit. Mr. Truman, as you all know, I think, made the decision to drop the bomb. We only had 2 of them. We never told the Japanese that. Now, as soon as that happened, couldn't they have dropped it in an uninhabited area? Again, keep in mind, the planes in that day could not find a target and hit it. They could only find a really big target, a big city. To drop it in an uninhabited area, well, again, we only had 2 of them. If the Japanese didn't surrender, well, we had wasted, it would take months for us to put together another one. Again, this was all kept from the Japanese. Now, something else I want to remind you of. None of us have experienced this. These men who made the decision had not just fought 1 world war, folks, they had fought 2. We can't understand what that was like. They had fought 2 world wars, and with all due respect, they were going to try to make sure they were determined that we're not going to fight a 3rd world war. So they told Germany, "You're going to surrender unconditionally. You're not going to surrender at all." And they told Japan, "All right, Germany surrendered unconditionally. you Japanese are going to surrender unconditionally, or we're going to keep fighting. The Japanese said, oh, we'll surrender. And people, the Japanese, they say, tried to surrender, but we wouldn't let them. No, the Japanese did not surrender unconditionally. In August 1945, we dropped a bomb, first on Hiroshima. Yeah, I guess, all right, hit melted steel girders to the ground. It dissolved human bodies into vapor. I mean, it was terrible. The Japanese did not surrender unconditionally. So we then turned around and dropped a second atomic bomb on the city of Nagasaki. I'll try to spell that. And this time, the Japanese didn't know we didn't have any atomic bombs left. But this time, the Japanese agreed to surrender unconditionally. Now, one thing about the Japanese, when their emperor told them to surrender, all the Japanese surrendered. That's something in the war we're fighting now. There's no one man who can do that. In fact, the surrender was so complete that General Wainwright, who had been left behind in the Philippines, was put on an island with a bunch of American servicemen. And one day, General Wainwright got the word, hey, the Japanese government surrendered. So General Wainwright, he did not have one bullet, one gun, not even a knife, but he walked right up, straight and tall, into the commanding officer of Japan, and the Japanese government had all the ammunition. He said, he was courteous to the man. He said, the commanding general, the Japanese, said, from now on, I'm going to take over this island. I'm in charge. And the Japanese gave it to him. Again, why did he do it? The emperor had said surrender, and when the emperor said surrender, they all surrendered in a pile. The United States was to go on and rebuild both Germany and Japan. And from that day to this, Japan has been our friend. All right, I'll pause here if anybody wants to comment. Does anybody have any ideas on, was the dropping of the atomic bomb right or necessary? Anybody? Was it morally right? Was it
wrong?
You think, okay, go ahead and say why.
Because it's bad for the earth.
Bad for the earth, okay. But the loss of 1 million servicemen, American servicemen, about 3 or 4 million Japanese would not have been bad for the earth. All right, if the war had gone on, probably 1 million more servicemen would have been killed invading the islands of Japan. That's the point I'm trying to make. And the war might have dragged on. I'll tell you what my 8th grade history teacher said, and this was in 1962. She said if Roosevelt could have lived, the war might still be going on. We don't know that. I asked my dad about that. He didn't think so. But what if the bomb had not been dropped? All right, anyone else? I mean, hey, if you think it's wrong, I mean, I can understand. I mean, you're dropping a bomb and killing 70,000 supposedly innocent civilians in one, and then turning around a few days later and killing 70,000 more. That's small numbers compared to the loss that would have been had we kept on fighting. And again, the Japanese were not about to surrender until they realized, hey, we can't fight this. Anyone else? Your comments are welcome. Again, these people had gone through too. What they wanted to do was make sure that when the war was over, they would occupy both Germany and Japan. And both, fast forward to 2014, we still have troops in Japan, and we still have troops in Germany. We're occupying both countries to make sure that those two countries never do rise up. Now, of course, other countries rise up in their place. Always has been. But at least Germany is our friend. Japan is our friend. At least it appears to be. Anyone else? All right. Okay, we'll go on. And the war is over, finally. New order in effect. The new order that we're talking about involves genocide, essentially it was eliminating the weaker races And it wasn't just the Jews that the Germans hoped to eliminate, but the Slavs, the Gypsies. The Gypsies folk are people of somewhat unknown origin. Some of them are speaking a language related to the language of Pakistan, which indicates that way back, way before the time of Christ, they may have migrated out of Pakistan and started roaming the earth. But some gypsies are known to have come from other places. Some people used to think the word gypsy was like Egyptian, but now we don't think so. But they're people who have just simply roamed all over the globe with no settled place to live and been content to move a while, move around a while, stay a little while in one place, then move on. Hitler looked on them as being inferior and tried to eliminate them. Now, their book shows about Hitler's plans for taking over the eastern part of Europe. He said the idea that about taking land that we don't own and taking the people and starving these people, killing them outright so that the Aryans can live on that land. He said that doesn't bother me a bit, and what people think about me for doing this, he said, I just don't care. The man was just a cold-blooded, outright heartless killer with no moral standard about him completely. So he said, I will go straight ahead, cold-bloodedly. Whatever they may think about me is a matter of complete indifference. I'm going ahead anyway. As for the Jews, they were put into camps, and at first they were lined up, some of them at least were lined up in front of firing squads. A young soldier told I shoot them dead. It was known that the soldiers who shot them dead were having nightmares, were becoming drunk, substance abusers, drug dependent, and generally refusing to eat, getting sick, and having all kinds of physical and mental problems. They said, we can't have this. And also they said the bullets cost too much, there's a cheap way to do it, so they finally figured out the cheapest way to get rid of them all is gas. So they put them in gas chambers, and they would tell them, hey, we're going to give you a bath. So they'd issue them a bar of soap and say, you all get in this bath, this shower facility, we'll give you a shower. Now folks, if they'd have known where they got the soap, they'd have died right there. Soap is rendered from the fat of animals, except that this soap came from human fat, the fat of humans who had been executed beforehand. I'm sorry if this sounds gross, but it means people have lived through this. There's a few of them are still alive. They were put in these gas chambers, and they were crammed in so tightly that they couldn't even fall when they died. And then instead of the water being turned on, the gas was turned on from Volkswagen. Yes, Hitler had the Volkswagen, and the gas would be turned on from the engine of a Volkswagen. And the people inside would realize they were dying and start screaming. And they knew they were all dead when after 30 minutes all the screaming stopped. They'd wait a few more minutes before they opened the door. When they opened the door, they'd find the bodies still standing because they were packed too tightly to fall. They'd take the bodies, strip their hair off because the hair had some value commercially. They'd open their mouth, and if they had gold teeth, in those days they didn't use crowns, they used gold to fill teeth. If they had gold in their teeth, they'd take the gold out, and then they'd get the property of any of these Jews that had it and take that and put it in the homes of Germans. And again, take some of their body fat and render it to more soap. All this, folks, if it sounds gross, I'm sorry. This was what went on when my father was a little bit younger than you people are now, than most you people are now. And I'm not talking about something that happened thousands of years ago. Some people who insist that our morals have improved with time, the Holocaust did a lot to undermine that theory, that this morality was even worse than the morality of Nero, even worse than anything we'd read about among the Assyrians, who the Assyrians practiced some. Now later,